Thank you for joining us for a second edition of OLR Connections. This is really a continuation of the conversation that Mike Miller, Chad Kopinski, and myself, David Doherty, had concerning Med Talks. In that conversation, we spent a significant amount of time talking about what it means to do Masonic education and Masonic research, and we wanted to share that with you as well. So please enjoy the thoughts and considerations that we had, with our sincere apologies to Mike for not allowing him to talk near as much as we should have.
James Buckhorn actually did a presentation over at Chicago Masonicon. And one of the things that he talked about that I thought was really just kind of a neat perspective is he talked about the change of the role of a Masonic educator, going more to kind of what we are hoping to do in Ohio, or hope to do in Ohio, is that there's almost a contract between the Masonic educator and his audience, that the Masonic educator is going to present something like an idea, facilitate a discussion, but that hopefully the audience will challenge his assumptions, will challenge him to make his point coherently and, as concise as possible. To ask him why, or how do you know that, or why do you know that? Because that makes the educator also accountable and responsible and authentic. That also allows him to be able to kind of tell the audience something that is reliable, authentic, so there's that unspoken, almost social contract between the two that needs to be looked at. What do you want to say, Mike?
Because of the experience of Masons that presented too, if anybody was in the room that was still a new Mason, they should have been able to been like, hey, if they just did that education piece or they came up with that, I could do my own thing too. So, it also made it tangible for other people to start doing their own Masonic education on whatever topic too.
Well, and I got to be honest that, this is my own thing. I feel a little bit like a broken record because I feel like most of the stuff that I've done all has been a similar format and all has kind of a similar theme. And I kind of made fun of myself during my presentation saying that all my things pretty much fall under one of three categories. And they kind of do. And so in my conversations prepping for this, I realized that, I've kind of been eschewing doing actual honest to God academic research just because it doesn't necessarily interest me. But then I talked to, you, and I'm like, I really should do something that's a little bit more, I don't know, traditional, in keeping with, honest to God academic research. And so that's in preparing for my piece on Leopold, that was nothing really like classic Masonic research. It kind of rekindled my fascination with Shearer, and now I've just way in the weeds on that thing. So tried to do more classic research in the goal of doing more of a classic presentation that has more, I hate saying the word academic, but has more to it than just this is the way Chad sees things.
I mean, there's value to both. And,
Perspective is
if you're making people think, then you're doing good. So,
but I mean, when it comes to Masonic research and Masonic education presentations, they usually kind of fall into like one of three categories, right? One is the typical academic, right? History, numbers, facts, figures, what you can verify. Then you also kind of get some that are more of, this is my experience, this is my thought, this is kind of, the warm, fuzzy-ish stuff. And you also kind of get something that's sort of in the middle, right? That's sort of like, I see a connection here and I have a reaction to it. So let me kind of research my own experience and connect Julia Child's cookbook to the lessons in the third degree, because that really means something, to me. And I don't know, I feel like for me personally, I need to get more back towards the academic side of that. So
If you remember back to, I think it was our last in-person meeting, which would have been in May, I think.
University
I believe
Lodge.
that,
Yeah.
yeah, when we met at University Lodge, we had a event. I don't know if that's the right word. We had a session in the morning where it was pretty much just a round table, and nobody came in really prepared. It was, just a conversation of, this is what I've been working on, this is what I'm thinking. And there were a number of connections people made. Hey, oh, I've read about this, and helped people put pieces together that maybe they hadn't thought of before. And that was actually a couple of the presentations that were given on Med Talks came out of that. But if you remember, in that, one of the questions I asked, and I never did get an answer, I don't know that I ever will, was, can we create a list of Masonic research categories? With the idea being kind of like you just said, history, yes. And what it came down to is everybody came up with pretty much the same list you just did, but couldn't go beyond that. But I guarantee you, of all of the things that have been written, published, presented, etc., they all don't fit into those categories perfectly. So
No.
I still wonder if coming up with a list of categories wouldn't help people think about what they're doing and how it fits together with what other people are doing. I don't know that it's necessary. I just wonder if it wouldn't be helpful. But I still haven't come up with that list myself either, so I don't have the answer.
Well, when we were trying to get a definition of education for Ohio, I mean, that was what we wrote for Ohio was intentionally vague, but oddly supportive. In that we wanted to say, like, it could be anything as long as you properly frame it, right? As long as you give it the right context. Because, I mean, in the right hands, right, this roll of paper towels could be a phenomenal educational presentation. In the wrong hands, it's a guy waving around a roll of bounty, but there has to be a way to kind of facilitate that. One, the guy who can do that, and one, the guy who wants to try something and run into a brick wall. But it's okay because you learn a lot from that. With research, I totally see what you're saying, Dave, because it's almost like the curse of the blank page, right? You love history, you love learning, you love those connections. But so it says, yeah, great. If you want to join the OLR, you need to make sure that you do a presentation. If you're going to, like, I don't, what? Like, where do I start? What do I do? Where do I, and to be able to have a category to say, oh, I'm really interested in May.
Mike, it was something you said earlier that I kind of wanted to call back on, which was, you mentioned at one point that you kind of made these connections and ideas started coming up. I forget exactly how you phrased it, but so I guess my question, if I have to form a question, my question is, what are some of the sources and resources that you have come across in Masonry that has led to educational opportunities that maybe you wouldn't have anticipated?
Well, so, like I said earlier, I really started out with a lot of YouTube and trying to see what it was I was getting myself in. Um, Masonic Roundtable, those guys were great because it was multiple jurisdictions, multiple opinions. The topics were very broad, so I watched a lot of that. And so that's really where I started. A lot of YouTube, some of the stuff from out of Missouri. Um, then just from experiences, from meeting one guy and they're like, hey, come down to our lodge. We do this way or that way. And then I think that's how I became better friends with you, David, was, one meeting led to another meeting. Hey, let's go here, let's go there. I mean, we did a lot of the same travels for Schofield down in Kentucky. And, some of those guys, the way that they do, lodge down there, it was just really cool to see how some of those education pieces that they took the time to present while we were there. And of course, they say something in there, and then that ends up in a Google search or digging in the lodge library at books that otherwise don't get touched. Um, and then, of course, Lodge of Research has so many different resources on the website too, and things that people have started. And it's funny because now having those multiple resources too, you can go back and some of the information may not be 100% correct that was posted, from an article, 50s, 60s, or whatever the start date is for the Lodge of Research. Um, and just being able to know, hey, look, there's another resource here to where this can be corrected or whatever. So I know I'm kind of getting on tangents here, but
No, that's fine.
there's so many different resources that are out there. Southern California Lodge of Research, they put out a good publication.
Great stuff. Yeah.
I think I actually knew about Worshipful Brother Taylor Kleinig. He was one of those guys that popped up on YouTube. I told him, I was like, man, you're YouTube famous, when I first met him. He did a couple things with Southern California, or yeah, Lodge of Research over there, and that kind of got me to pick up some of their magazines and stuff at one point.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Ohio Lodge of Research website, and we keep commenting that we have thousands of articles there. And as you said, some of them are older, and some of them probably need to be corrected and so forth. And honestly, I have no idea what the actual number is. It's just, I mean, thousands of articles. But there is on the Ohio Lodge of Research website, there is a directory of every publication, every article that we have that is hot linked. You can literally read down the list and click on it to get to the article. Now, if you're not a member, some of them will not be available to you. Some of them will, but that is, I mean, and actually, it was kind of fun to go through and see them all. It's like, oh wow, I didn't know this. I didn't know we had this. Oh, I forgot we had this. Yeah,
It's
so many
dangerous.
rabbit holes are wide open now. But what about you, Chad? Where did you make connections, or where did you find resources that you didn't think you would find them?
I shouldn't be here. Like, it's not even imposter syndrome. I'm in a little lodge in Appalachian, Ohio. Like, there's been one grandmaster out of my lodge ever. I mean, there's nothing happens in southeastern Ohio. It's just that nobody's looking, or it's not as connected as other places. The connections that I've made, I will try to make this as brief as possible. But I got a phone call once from a guy named Jess Rains, and
I've heard of him.
Jess, he's nobody. So I was working in college admissions. They were creating a membership committee, and they wanted people who are under 40. I said, well, Jess, I'm like 39 and a half. It's like, don't tell anybody. But getting on that committee, I get to meet Bill Carter and Thomas Savage and Jeremy Charninghouse and Dan Randenbarger and a guy named Steve Kokenauer and a guy named Dave Kaler, something like that. It got me out of my district, and it got me to talk to people outside of there. And the next thing I know, I'm on the education committee. And the next thing I know, I meet Pickett, Ron Runyon, Chad Simpson, whatever. And the next thing I know, I meet, Steve Hessler. And so it is the easiest way to say this, that it's amazing the adventure you have when you decide to step outside your front door. I had no idea what the hell I was getting into with Masonry. I just knew that I had questions. And so I started asking them. And I just started asking them. And the next thing I know, people, like I said to you, Mike, it's amazing what happens when you reach out your hand, like who reaches back. The next thing I know, I'm given an opportunity to do whatever, right? And so my Masonic life has been just these little moments of meeting people that lead to the next thing, right? I get that phone call from Jess that leads me to meet the guys from the membership committee, that gets me in the education committee, that gets me to present at the Midwest conference, that gets me to be the president of the Midwest conference. And, then to be ahead of the ed committee, I get to travel all around the state, talking to Masonic educators and finding out just the wonderful things that are happening, the wonderful connections, and being able to see, we all get in our own little bubbles, but being able to be at a level where I can see that there are so many connections that can be made, and to be in a position like I can make those connections, or at least help them. Like, do you know about this? Do you know what they're doing down in the 6th district or the 12th? Do you know about Steve Wallace down and Jordan Pickens down in Southeast Ohio? Do you know about uh, Alex Herbert? Do you know about, all those guys? Um, so I didn't answer your question other than to say, pretty much every time I do anything in Masonic education, I marvel at the connections that are there.
Most people know that you're a theater guy. And if I
Yeah,
remember right, you got a pretty good connection to improv as well.
I do.
So what little I know of improv, the rule is yes and.
Mhm.
That is your Masonic life right there.
I'll
Serious.
take it.
That's how you talk about all these connections. It's every time somebody throws something at you, it's yes. And next thing so that leads to all these other opportunities and these other connections. I don't know if you've ever thought of it that way or not, but that's what crossed my mind.
I haven't, but then at some point I probably should start saying no to things. But I mean, and I think maybe that's why I'm a little sort of fixated on the idea of allowing people to engage. That it's so easy for us to sit there and think that we don't have a voice, or we don't have anything to say, or that we can't do things, or that this is impossible. It's just not. It is amazing what can happen when you step outside your door. It's amazing what can happen when you reach out your hand. It'll take you places you couldn't even thought of. But thank you. Those are nice words from you. I appreciate it.
I agree.
So,
I agree. Yeah, and that's honestly that's one of the things I have picked up and learned from many people in Masonry, but from you in particular, is that most people, especially in my Masonic life, would not believe, would not accept that I am actually a very introverted person. I can spend hours by myself and love it. And the first few education events that I went to, and you and I have talked before, one of them was the very first roadshow. It was a challenge for me to even decide to go to that. It was just kind of like you said, I don't know that I have anything to offer. I don't know that I'm going to get anything out of it. It's just, I'm going to be wasting my time. I'm wasting their time. I'm just not going to go. Well, then, one thing leads to another and you end up there. And we overuse the word fellowship too much, but it is a wonderful fellowship in these education environment, because once you're there, people just suck you in. Once you're there, you can't get away, even if you want to. And that is meant to be a very positive thing. And, so that has very much changed my approach, my strategy, my way through of my Masonic life in the number of years that I've done this. So
it is supportive in that. I mean, guys want to hear what you have to say. And they'll tell you when it's great. They'll tell you when it's awful. They'll tell you, they will commiserate with you when you're like, God, this just sucks. What, when you hit a brick wall, they will help you through it. And if it's great, they'll be the first ones there to, stand up and applaud.
I think you made the comment before about, I forget how you phrased it, but lowering the bar to entrance or something like that. It's not lowering the bar. That implies making the requirements less stringent. It's just opening the door. It's just opening the door and welcoming people in. And I think that's the interesting thing about these. Like I said, everybody is there for the same reason. Everybody there is there because they want to be. And it's supportive. I've never been in improv, but it is a yes and environment.
I think there's also something in there as well that we haven't talked about, but we sort of did. When we were talking about James talking about this, responsibility, this contract between educator and audience, I do also think that there is something that you both have totally leaned into, is that if you are somebody who, for lack of a better word, um, you're comfortable in that world, I think it's incumbent upon us to extend that invitation to others who may not. I think it's important for us to say to somebody, I think you have a presentation in you. I think you need to do this. I think, that this is, there are so many times in my life that I have not believed in myself, but for someone to come to me and say, yeah, I think you can and should do this. Even if I didn't see it in myself, if somebody like Dave Dougherty, Mike Miller, Charlie Murphy, Jess Rains, my worshipful master at the time, Brian Robertson says, no, I think you got this in you and you can do this.
Mike, you've been too quiet. You got to talk now.
I jokingly say about the bar, too. And, you guys are going to have big shoes to have to step into. But, I have no doubts that when we get to that part on down the road that I'm going to be fine. You guys are not going to set me up for failure. And like you've already expressed, all I have to do is reach out and ask. So, just really just trying to take in a lot of what you guys are saying, because in a way that's my learning style too, is to watch and learn. That's just how I learn.
But you need that. I mean, you need people who talk and people who listen. So,
yeah.
I mean, I'll be honest, I understand my world verbally. Like if I can articulate something, it means I can understand it. Very often, I just need somebody who can listen. And I'll call them like, listen, I need you to know, I just need to talk through this and tell me if I'm crazy or not, or if this is even remotely, does this make sense? And, as you go through life, and especially as you go through masonry, and as you go through life, when you find those people, you can call and be like, all right, so I think this makes sense, Mike, Dave, Laramie, whomever. And Mike, sometimes you just need the people just to kind of listen to take those all in. So
It's very organic when you're having these kinds of conversations. Like that's one of the things that I really liked about the Masonic Roundtable. Now, how much they prepare before they have each topic, that's beyond me. But their conversations are organic when they're having them with each other. But I mean, there's the stuff that we're doing now. That's the kind of stuff that interests me. Just because just in random conversation, different things come up and different ideas come up, and then that's what leads me down my rabbit holes of, I don't know much about that. I'm going to Google that, or I'm going to see where I can find something that, and that's how a lot of this stuff, that's what I like.
Yeah. So Chad, you mentioned earlier
that
we keep pulling from the same pool, the, Schofield Society, Ohio Lodge of Research. How do we get more guys involved? How do we get more people out of the Blue Lodge, out of the chapters, out of the York Rite, and involved in these types of events and conversations?
Why do you do this to me?
Okay, Mike, how do you answer that question?
No, we're good. I think this sounds awful, but one of the things we used to talk about in theater is that some of the companies I work with, we knew that once we got somebody in the door, we had them. But how do we get them in the door?
Mm-hmm.
And we had this really crazy idea that we were going to do what we called guerrilla theater. So we would prepare a piece. We would tell the bar that we were coming, but we would just run into a bar, grab a table, and we would just start doing this play, like this scene, right in the middle of the bar. And, we'd be down and run out. And it's ridiculously obnoxious, especially if you're there like on a date or, waiting to propose to somebody. All of a sudden, these actors come in and do their thing. But that idea of going from invitation to intrusion, I think we almost kind of need to do that. I think the benefits to the road show were that a district would say, we want to have something. Cool. All right. We'll come to you. You give us this place. Tell us what you want to talk about. We will bring the speakers. You provide the place, the parking, and the cookies. And so for the guys who, like you 5 years ago, who are like, I don't know if I want to drive. They may not drive across the state if they don't know what they're going to get in for. But if there's something new, weird, and, a curiosity that's in the lodge 10 miles away, they'll go to that. And once we get them in the door, they're hooked.
Yeah.
Once we get a guy to come to one of these things once, now they're linked in. Now they'll be connected. Now they'll start looking for it. So I think, as awful as it sounds, I think we need to work beyond invitation and go almost back to the intrusion model.
Is Grand Lodge planning on reinstituting roadshows at any point in time? And if not, wonder if that is something the Ohio Lodge of Research should or could take on. Basically, put the word out there that if there's a lodge that wants a roadshow like event, the Lodge of Research will help organize it, help find the speakers and so forth, and then the lodge does all the heavy lifting.
I think they should, could, and have to happen. And for anybody listening who's like, what the hell are those things? The road shows were essentially a pop-up day of education. You had an idea about a theme, like we want to discuss this, and you reached out to somebody on the education committee, and that would get to usually, Chad Simpson and myself, and we would, as long as you had a place for us to be, and as long as, you could provide some kind of sustenance, we'd bring the speakers. We would find the speakers. They would be usually 4 or 5. We told them to have a 45-minute long presentation so that there would be at least 15 minutes between each. Before the last speaker, we would break for milk and cookies because we just felt that was something to, there's a story behind that. But the idea was to bring quality education to places that might not necessarily go, and to get people from one side of the state to the other. And yeah, I would say if anyone's interested in doing one of those things, reach out somehow. OLR, Schofield, Education Committee, like reach out your hand. Somebody will grab it. So
there you go.
I think that's a great solution, because you're putting it in someone's face. I've kind of had the same idea as far as at least putting the information out there. I've went, recently was given access to promote the Ohio Lodge of Research through our Facebook page, and I went and added myself to multiple districts' Facebook groups and threw the information out there. So it was a little bit intrusive that way, but the more people that you get information out to, then they can, at least hopefully target some of the guys that otherwise might not have seen or known that we exist, or know that there were more options for education out there. But I absolutely like the idea. I was gonna point out the obvious problems, but Chad actually gave a really good solution as far as putting it out there in their face and then dangle it like
so
a
Mike,
worm, see who bites.
Thank you for joining us for our second edition of OLR Connections, a project which we hope will continue. Hopefully you enjoyed our thoughts and ideas pertaining to these topics. And if you are a member of the OLR and you would like to join in and participate in these discussions, please reach out to me or any of the other officers, and we'll try to include as many people as we possibly can in these conversations.